I am going to start reading aloud chapters each day from my book called Elephants, Aunts, and the Moon. And this is a book I started writing years ago, and I had it tucked away and I tried to get it published. And then one day my daughter said, "Well, I've never read that book, Mom. Can I see it?" And so I sent it to her electronically. And then a few months later, she came to me and she had published it and made it into a real book, even though it was always a story, but now it's the kind of book that you can pick up and read. And she had also added these great illustrations, so I'll be showing those along as I go. And these are the aunts, and they're very old aunts. And you'll learn more about why there's elephants in the story. And it takes place in 1969 when I guess I was 11 or turning 11. And that was the first year that people landed on the moon. For some time, different countries had been trying to send rockets up and get up there, but that was the year that 3 men actually were on the moon. And I remember being a little girl and getting to stay up late and watching the television and seeing this thing that seemed like, could that even be real? And yeah, so that plays into it, but that's only a small part. That kind of helps set the tone or set the place. And the first chapter is called Lipstick, and it's based a little bit on something that really happened to me. But everything in the book has just some ideas, and then the rest of it is all in my imagination. But I'm actually wearing lipstick today, and I don't usually like to wear lipstick, and I think it has to do with this story. "Emily, don't," Katherine warned. "Aunt Minerva told us not to monkey." Her eyes moved from her sister towards the stairway, then back. Katherine was standing at the doorway of the room, unwilling to join her sister, but reluctant to leave. "Let's just go out to the sleeping porch, like she said." She twisted her hair around her fingers and kept one hand on the doorknob. "Yeah, right," snorted Emily. "And play with Binky? That sounds like a real thrill." There were few toys at their great-aunt's house. Except for Binky, the ugly corduroy elf doll with its angry plastic face that the aunts had won at a church bazaar, there were few toys. In fact, there was really not much of interest for the girls. This was already turning out to be one long, boring summer. Henderson was not a big town. There were no movie theater, there was only a few stores. Emily looked in the mirror and smoothed her bangs down. Why did they have to curl out like wings? She turned her attention back to the small metal tube she held in her hand. And back in the day, they had little samples of lipstick, and it was very small, no bigger than your pencil, or no bigger than a pencil or your finger. There was something way down at the bottom. She could see a bit of red, but when she twisted the container, all that was left of the lipstick was still out of reach. Emily pulled open the drawer of Aunt Loretta's dressing table. A heavy scent of powder wafted out. She wrinkled her nose as she caught just a hint of mold, and then pushed aside the clutter of jars and compacts and found what she needed. What does it matter to Aunt Minerva anyway? It isn't her room. She took the bobby pin she had found in the drawer and dug out a bit of the lipstick, thick and red. Using her finger, she spread it onto her lips. Pursing her lips together, she dabbed them with a Kleenex. Then she held her head back, turning from side to side as she looked in the mirror over the old dressing table. "How do I look, Kat?" she said to her sister. "Oh, Em, you should take it off!" Katherine was biting her own lips, as if doing so would somehow remove the paint from her sister's. Her hand had moved from twisting her hair to pulling a loose thread on her shorts. "It's really dark. They'll be mad if they see. Please!" Katherine's voice grew higher with each word. "You are such a baby," said Emily. "Maybe I'll add some eyeshadow or some rouge." She dug deeper in the drawer, looking for something else of interest. In spite of dressing like a tomboy, as Aunt Minerva called it, Emily loved playing dress-up. This makeup was so different from the stuff women use these days. At home, their mother had push-up tubes of Bonnie Bell lip gloss and some blusher and a bit of eyeliner. Her mother's dresser was nothing like the fancy dressing table Aunt Loretta had, with its canisters and vials, and each one more mysterious than the next. She pulled the top off a cardboard container of dusting powder. Nearly spilling it. Using the powder puff inside the box, she patted the powder onto her face. Isn't this what ladies do? Dust their noses in the powder room? She gave a fake smile to her sister. The dark red of the lipstick stood out against her pale skin and was out of place with her summer play clothes. Then suddenly turning back to the mirror, she said, maybe I will take it off. She paused. It's kind of got a weird taste. It's kind of bitter. She tipped her head back the way people do when they're puzzled about something. Can you get me a Kleenex? Katherine ran across the hallway to the bathroom, looking both ways before doing so, like she was crossing a busy highway. Here, she said, pushing a box of tissues toward her sister. She had stepped into the room now. Wipe it off, Em. The thread on her shorts was long now, and the hem was frayed. The aunts couldn't understand why girls would want to wear shorts made from cutting off old jeans. Emily wiped her lips roughly, and then turned back toward her sister. There. Are you happy? The expression on Kat's face made Emily turn back toward the mirror. She knew now why Katherine looked worried. In the mirror, she could see that her lips were still a deep red, as if she hadn't wiped them off at all. Let's go into the bathroom and wash it off, pleaded Katherine, pulling at her sister's arm. Come on, Em. Under the sink, the girls found an old washcloth. Katherine scrubbed it across the bar of soap and then got to work on her sister's lips. Kat, scrub faster, Emily said. It's starting to taste really bad. By now the bitterness was stronger. Her lips were tingling and the taste was spreading all over to the inside of her mouth. She pushed with her tongue against the roof of her mouth the way their dog did when they gave her a spoonful of peanut butter. I am, said Katherine. She put more soap on the washcloth and handed it to her sister. Here, you scrub while I look for something else. She began to open cupboard doors and drawers and suddenly unconcerned about whether their old aunts could hear them. Kat, it's getting worse. Emily began to cry. The taste was everywhere now and her tongue felt sore on the edges. Kat, do you think there's something wrong with it? Katherine's eyes grew wide. That's it, Em. I don't care if we do get in trouble. We have to tell them. Emily nodded in agreement and let her younger sister take her arm. The two girls went step by step down the stairway, Emily holding the washcloth to her lips and Katherine holding the railing and pulling her sister along. For an odd reason, Emily suddenly wished that they were wearing dresses. They could hear their great aunts in the parlor. How long did these tea parties go on anyway? The aunts and her friend Millie were seated at the big table. They had china cups and plates in front of them, and Emily could see a tray with these awful coconut date bars that they had gotten at the church bake sale that morning. She sure didn't look forward to a summer of such tea parties with more of these desserts. Wait, we just can't go in, can we? Emily pulled at Katherine, making her stop. Well, what else can we do, Em? She looked up at her sister's eyes, now filled with tears. It'll be okay, Em. They'll know what to do. It was Aunt Loretta who first noticed them. She looked up from her plate and nearly spilled her tea. Girls, what's the trouble? Her voice squeaked a bit, and Emily could hear the funny whistle that followed words that ended with S. Do you need something? Now Aunt Minerva looked over at them. What did I say about monkeying? She asked, her eyes peering through her dark eyebrows. It was more of a bark than a question. Emily thought of the way the sergeant yelled at the troops on her latest favorite TV show. Somehow Private Pyle was always doing something wrong, and the sergeant was always yelling at him. You went right ahead and got into things you had no business getting into. It seems like you found out. Minerva's sharp voice matched her appearance. Everything about her was hard and square, from the broad padded shoulders of her dress to her angular eyeglasses worn on a chain around her neck, to the orthopedic shoes that she clumped around in. Minerva, that's enough. Aunt Loretta stopped her mid-sentence. The girls looked at their small red-haired aunt with surprise. For a moment, Emily forgot about the taste in her mouth, her sore lips swollen and raw from the washcloth, and the angry look on Minerva's face. Aunt Loretta never spoke sharply. She never talked back to her own sister. Can't you see that Emily is crying? She looked over at Minerva, whose mouth was shut and her eyes were pinched together in a tight line. Come here, dear. What's happened to you? Continued Aunt Loretta. She gently pulled aside the washcloth and took Emily's face in her hands. She lifted Emily's chin and peered at her lips. Take a breath and tell me. Emily spilled out the story of being bored, looking around, and then snooping in the makeup drawer. She explained about finding the funny little metal tube of lipstick and putting it on. They hadn't meant to monkey, she added. Oh my goodness, that stuff must be old as the hills. It's probably from the time when I used to go to the city with my girlfriends. We always loved to get the samples from Dayton's. Oh, she stopped and clapped her hand over her mouth. It must be rancid. I wonder if it gave you some kind of an allergic reaction. Oh, you poor dear. She let out a deep sigh, shaking her head back and forth as if she was scolding herself, and then said, I'll see what we have to get rid of the taste. Perhaps I'd better call Dr. Grossman. Aunt Minerva had seen Millie to the door and was now busy clearing away the tea party. Emily was afraid she'd break the delicate china the way she was slamming it on the tray as she set it on the table. She carried it to the kitchen, and Emily could hear her in there opening and shutting things and running water and rattling dishes. While Aunt Loretta rummaged around in the china cabinet looking for something, Emily turned to Katherine. Her forehead was wrinkled, and her cheeks were raised. What's rancid? She whispered. Why would she need to call the doctor? Emily saw the familiar look cross her sister's face, but it disappeared as Kat patiently explained. It's gone bad. You know, like meat. The lipstick must be made from animal fat, and it's spoiled. Katherine always knew stuff like this. Even though she was 2 years younger than Emily, she often seemed to know more. It didn't even seem like she had to read about things to learn. She just knew. Will it hurt me? Emily bit nervously at her lips and pushed her tongue against her cheeks. The water from the washcloth had dripped on her t-shirt, and it clung to her skin. She pulled it away and tried to smooth it down. I don't know. Aunt Loretta didn't seem too worried, but maybe she just wants to be sure, said Kat. Here you go. Try these. Aunt Loretta had returned with a crystal bowl of pastel-colored candies. They're party mints, she smiled. That ought to do the trick. Here, take some. She held out the dish to Emily, but when she tried to take one, she discovered they were all stuck together. Tisk, tisk. Aunt Loretta reminded Emily of a chicken clucking about. Her soft, round body, her funny dyed hair that looked pink in just the right light, and her nervous jerking motions she made as she broke apart the mints almost brought a smile to her lips. Here you go, dear, she said as she handed her the bowl with the mints she had broken apart. The mints were strangely soft and hard at the same time. Emily held one in her mouth and felt it dissolve. The candy was cool and sweet, and for a moment it really did help. The bitter taste in her mouth seemed to disappear. Her shoulders relaxed, and she took a deep breath. But then, there it was again. She reached for another mint and knew she'd start crying again if anyone said anything. Aunt Minerva had come back into the room. She put away the china cups in the china cabinet, looking over at Emily between tasks. Her raised eyebrows and pinched lips said more than any words. Emily began to cry. Oh, my sweet thing, there you go, said Aunt Loretta, pulled Emily to her chest and patted her back. It's not going away, is it? Emily shook her head. That's it, I'm calling Dr. Grossman. He's our neighbor, you know, and he's just across the way. She went to the little desk where she kept papers and found his number and dialed. Emily could hear her voice but couldn't make out the words. In a moment she returned. Dr. Grossman said the lipstick most likely caused a bit of an allergic reaction. It's like when you eat strawberries or eggplant and your mouth gets a little sore. As long as you're not having trouble breathing, it should be fine. He said for you to take one of the allergy pills your mother sent along. I tell you what. She had taken her shopping bag from its hook on the hall tree. She struggled to open the clasp on the funny little coin purse, and then she pulled out $2 and held out one to each girl. In the corner by the china cabinet, Aunt Minerva raised one eyebrow and crossed her arms across her thin chest. You walk on down to the drugstore and get the strongest tasting candy you can find. Peppermints, lemon drops, black licorice, red hots, buy it all. If one doesn't work, then the next one will. The girls eyed the money she held out to them. A whole $1 each. That would buy a lot of candy. Emily swallowed the pill and held out her hand to take the money. The walk to the store was longer than the girls remembered. Usually the girls looked forward to trips to the store when they visited their aunts. It was so different from the stores in their own town. They could see the sign shaped like a peppermint stick from a block away. Emily hoped Mr. Hines wouldn't be there. He was always so chatty, and he wanted to catch up on what they had been doing since he saw them last. He looked like someone out of an old-fashioned book with his apron and the funny straps he used to keep his sleeves rolled up. The girl's mother said the store, with its creaky wooden floors and its long narrow aisles and shelves so crowded with odd packages that some things were hung on hooks sticking from the ends of the shelves, hadn't changed much since she was a girl. When they got there, Emily made Katherine go into the store to buy the candy. "I don't want people seeing me like this," she said. "It's bad enough being the weird visitors here this summer. I don't need to give people more to talk about." On the walk home, Katherine held the little paper bag of candy. She had devised a system she said would get the most out, help the most, and she doled out the candy one by one, alternating a spicy candy with a sweet or a sour one. By the time they got back to the aunt's house, the bitter taste really had lessened. After supper that night, Aunt Loretta announced that she had a special surprise. She told them to go into the parlor and wait. Then she appeared with a plate of store-bought cookies. Not the coconut date bars. Not even homemade cookies. Their mother never bought cookies. It was Sunday evening. Aunt Loretta turned on the TV and adjusted the rabbit ear antenna. Just in time for Disney. She stepped back, watching the expressions on their faces. The TV took a moment to warm up, but then the picture came into focus. Emily watched the familiar peacock spread its feathers out. But something was different from usual. The feathers were in color. "Aunt Minerva and I just had it delivered," Aunt Loretta announced. "Our old TV just gave us so much trouble, and now that there are more programs to watch on television, and so many of them are in color, well, we just thought, oh, Aunt Loretta, a color TV, it's wonderful." They'd be here for 6 Sunday evening Disney shows in color. That would make the time pass just a bit more quickly. Aunt Minerva didn't say anything, but from the way that she was watching, Emily was pretty sure she liked the TV too. That night, Katherine was already under the blankets of the bed the girls would be sharing in the upstairs sleeping porch. Katherine stood at the window looking out into the yard. The taste was gone now, and her tongue was back to normal. Her lips were still sore and raw, but just thinking about the lipstick made her bite them again. And you know what? I've got the wrong girl here, because it's Emily who had the lipstick. "Here, Em, I saved some for you." Katherine pointed to the box of peppermints on the dresser. "I figured it wouldn't hurt to have some candy before bed, just this once." Emily picked a candy from the box and let it dissolve slowly on her tongue. Outside, the sky was darker now, and the branches made silhouettes against it. She felt the springs under the mattress dip down as she climbed into the bed. "Thanks, Kat." But Katherine was nearly asleep and didn't answer. Emily lay on her back and watched the sky. She listened to her sister's breathing. 6 weeks. 6 weeks with these funny old women. 6 weeks in a tiny town where they didn't know any kids. 6 weeks away from home and her friends and Susan and all the other girls. When their visit ended, it would be nearly time for school to begin. How would she ever feel ready for junior high if she was stuck in this forgotten place? And the next chapter is called The Torn Page. But some of these things might seem strange to you today. But when I was a little girl, we didn't even have a TV. And then we got one, and it was only in black and white. And a lot of television programs were only in black and white. And so for them to get a new TV that was in color was a really big deal. And one of my favorite shows when I was growing up was every Sunday evening, there was a Disney show. And it would be different things. And it could be things that kept going week after week, but it was always something appealing for kids. And there'd be this peacock that all the feathers of the peacock would turn into some bright color. And that was a big deal. And that was kind of fun. And then there was something else that I was thinking of. But it seems so kind of old-fashioned, but to gather around a TV, you guys can watch what you want on YouTube and have Netflix and Hulu and all these things. But back then, the only things you could watch were what were on the TV. And so the girls they're at their aunt's house, and they're going to be kind of glad to have a TV, but there's not that much to watch on it, so they have to make their own fun. So as you are listening to me read, think about whether my character was based on Emily or Katherine. So Emily is the older sister, and she's the one who got into the lipstick, and she seems to be kind of not as happy about being there with the aunts. And Katherine is younger and seems to have quite a lot of common sense. And she doesn't seem to mind as much, but both girls are not real happy. They're going to be staying with the aunts, and we'll find out more as we go. So look for me posting another chapter in a few days.